All I can say is I hope you'll continue to make the community a better place.
Hey, man, for a cop, you ain't so bad, man. Give it up. The streets, man, word, give it up. Hey, Officer McCreery, this is Nico right here. This is my man, Nico.
Oh, good to meet you. I hear you're helping this guy with his vital work for our city.
Of all the people in Liberty City, the fact that it's Manny Escuela who introduces us to Francis McReary should in hindsight tell us everything we need to know. Manny himself is a walking contradiction, a former Spanish Lord member and heroin addict who now claims he's turned his life around for the good of his community, dedicated to spreading a positive image. But in reality, he's just another hypocrite. The guy talks about cleaning up the streets while hiring men like Nico, someone unknown willing to get his hands dirty if the price is right, or given the stage of the story when they meet, as long as he's being paid at all. See, it's never really about the good of the community for Manny. What he's chasing is fame. He's in the middle of filming his own documentary, showing off his supposed progress and highlighting the negative influence of the streets. He talks big, apparently in talks with TV execs on landing a TV show. And that's where his real interests lie. Not in actually helping people, but in being seen helping people. In that way, he's really not all that different from Francis. Both obsessed with appearances, desperate to look righteous while standing in the mud. Only Francis is so much worse. See, the way he talks about his brothers, most notably Packy, you would think he was the youngest of the bunch. He acts like the moral one, disgusted by the paths his parent older brothers took, ashamed of what they've done to the family name, or more specifically, ashamed of how they've disappointed their dear old mother, who idolizes Francis.
Sure, Ma, sure. Yeah, I've always been a good boy. You know me, Ma. Yes, I'll make commissioner.
At a glance, that family dynamic might make sense. I mean, you can easily mistake Francis for being the baby brother, scolding the other ones for their sins and reprimanding Nico and indulging in those sins. But that's not the case at all. In truth, Francis isn't the youngest, he's only younger than Derrick. And Gerald and Packy are the two youngest, with Packy being the baby if you don't count Kate. And the rest of the family? Well, they know exactly what Francis is. They know the kind of stories that follow him and the hypocrisy that runs through his veins. The same hypocrisy that's poisoned his relationship with them and even stained his position as Liberty City's police commissioner.
Nico, what's this I hear about you running with Patrick McCreery now these days?
He's got work and he's a good guy. You're not planning on taking him down, are you? Lay off him, for me.
I'm not planning on taking him down. He's my damn brother, you idiot. My brothers ain't no good, Nico. Trust me on that.
Growing up in an abusive household, Francis McReary seemed, from what we can gather, to have avoided the worst of what his father inflicted on his younger brothers, namely the sexual abuse that Gerald and Packy were forced to endure. But just because Francis escaped that particular horror doesn't mean his childhood was easy. It was still far from it. Now, usually I rely on police records to confirm official ages or piece together timelines, but Francis is the only McReary, with the exception of Kate, that doesn't have a criminal record. And so that makes it a little difficult on its own to pinpoint his exact age, or even fully understand what his early life looked like. And when it comes to their father, things get a little muddy there as well, so it's hard to determine what kind of presence he actually had in the home during the years that Derrick, Francis, and Gerald's childhood somewhat overlapped. So to get a clear picture of Francis's upbringing, the best we can do is look at the criminal records of his mom, Maureen, and Derrick. From there, we can start to piece Francis on the family timeline and make some educated guesses about his early environment, how that shaped him, and likely instilled a deep need to separate himself from the criminal life that surrounded him. The problem is, he built that separation on denial, because even as he tries to walk the righteous path, he can't admit that he's really not so different from the people he resents so much. Let's begin laying out a proper timeline and background. The father of the McReary family, like most of the McRearys, honestly had a criminal past. From what we know, he was arrested for murder sometime around 1950, and eventually became a fugitive in or before 1961, and we can infer this from Maureen McCreary's own police record. She was convicted as an accessory to murder and for harboring a fugitive during that same window. The LSPD database even lists her as a co-conspirator alongside him throughout the 50s and 60s. Now, Derrick was actually born in 1956. So what this really means is that there's a stretch of time where the McReary family was already growing up in what could only be described as a far from normal environment. Their father was a fugitive, constantly on the run from the law, and their mother was fully willing to hide him, keeping his secret safe from the police. Police records later echoed by Packy's own stories reveal that their father was physically abusive towards their mother, yet despite that, she refused to testify against him. Chances are this meant that their father, or maybe the whole family, was always on the move, attempting to lay low while creating the foundation for the unstable world Francis would later be born into, roughly 5 to 7 years later, around 1963. Logically speaking, this timeline makes sense. Francis would be 45 years old in 2008. Derrick would be around 52 at the exact same time, and it would mean Francis would come out roughly 10 years older than Gerald, which would then make sense with what we know from the family's background and the information revealed throughout the story, most notable of which Packy sharing Gerald's story on Francis wanting to become an altar boy.
Fucking Frankie, my brother. He may have a badge, but I tell you for a fact, he's as crooked as the rest of us McCrearys. More so. At least we ain't fucking hypocrites. Kate's the only decent one.
I can believe that.
You know Frankie, do you? I got a story for you if you do.
Another fucking story.
Shut up, Gordon! So Nico, when Francis and Gerald was growing up, Frankie becomes an altar boy. He swears to this day that he wanted to serve the Lord. Jerry knows the truth, though. He only put on that cassock so he could pocket the change in the collection plate. Fact. That's Francis, down to a fucking T. I don't even know if he realizes what a cookie is.
That sounds like the Francis McReary I met.
Of course, they say Francis was a kid, but it also means that Gerald obviously was too, but he was at least old enough and had enough social awareness to identify his older brother's true motives. And that story may even give us more information than we initially realize about the family. Maureen was extremely religious. The boys, despite everything, still grew up in a Catholic home, and therefore they were all raised in this conflicting, tension-filled house. On the one hand, you had your loving, God-fearing mother, while on the other, an angry, violent, abusive father, who, as time went on, Francis could have very well identified was a criminal and on the run, potentially even resenting the way that he treated his mother. Francis began to associate that selfish, greedy behavior with his brothers, who were already starting to spiral into trouble. Looking at Derrick's police records, he was arrested as early as 1970, only 14 years old. And if Francis was born in 1963, that would make him about 7 years old, already watching his older brother get caught up in crime. Derrick's arrests continued throughout his teens and into the 80s until eventually Gerald followed the same path, getting his first arrest in 1986 and landing himself in juvie. Even while Gerald was gone, Packy recalled how their mother would still set up a place for him at the dinner table every night, refusing to give up on him. That small act of hope ended one night when their father, drunk and furious, threw Gerald's plate against the wall, shattering it, and with it, the ritual she's quietly been abiding by since he first left. By that point, Francis would have been around 23 years old enough to recognize the house was slowly collapsing, and by which point he was already looking to an alternative path. These events draw a stark image of his home life, a violent, drunken father and brothers slipping deeper into crime and despair. Francis watched them all fall further into that world, and whether he wanted to admit it or not, it planted the seed of his lifelong fixation on being better than them, despite him being just like them. Whether Francis truly believed he was different or simply needed to see himself that way is hard to tell. But the way things ultimately play out between him and his brothers say enough on its own. As Packy explains, even if Francis ever claimed he wanted to set them straight, it likely would have meant nothing. Gerald knew him well enough to challenge the idea outright, even daring Francis to try and come after them. Francis had always carried himself like a self-righteous hypocrite, and Gerald had childhood stories to back that up. But the more interesting relationship, at least from a legal and narrative standpoint, is the one Francis has with Derrick. When Nico enters the picture in 2008, he's stepping into a family dynamic that has already settled into a tense, uneasy balance. And in Francis's own eyes, the hierarchy is simple. Packy's just a hood, Gerald is involved in things that are much worse and far more serious, and Derrick, as he puts it, is just the worst. Then Derrick returns to the country, and Francis learns not only that he's back, but that Nico's been working with him. That revelation enrages him, and the reaction makes one thing clear. Francis hates being kept out of anything involving his family, especially when it comes to his career.
Why didn't you tell me Derrick was back?
What?
Why didn't you tell me you was hanging around with my brother?
I assumed if you cared, you'd have found out.
Well, I have found out.
Okay, I got it, so...
Now, he's gonna ruin my life. If it wasn't bad enough having a bunch of crooks for brothers, now I've got him threatening to talk to a journalist about his family, about me.
Well, tell him to be quiet.
I am trying to become the commissioner of police. I'd be a laughingstock.
And Derrick, even though he sees him as similar to Packy and Gerald, has one major thing that separates him from the two youngest boys. Derrick is a snitch. Putting Francis's anger and defensiveness about his career aside for a second, and focusing strictly on Derrick, I think Francis always understood that he could handle his brothers as long as they stayed in their lane. The loyal, predictable criminal. Derrick is a criminal, but he isn't predictable. According to his own records, he's a police informant. He's snitched multiple times, leading to a number of high-profile arrests, and he's also dealing with a crippling heroin addiction. He even snitched on 2 former partners, Bucky Sligo and Aiden O'Malley, both of whom Derrick later sends Nico to kill. And with Gerald's own arrest, along with other information that later surfaces, completely dashing all hopes he had of none of the charges sticking and getting home sooner than later, it's implied Derrick also snitched on Gerald. And Gerald's own records confirm what we see in the game. By 2008, everything Gerald does is completely hands-off. He plans, organizes, and sets things up, but he has other people do the dirty work. The LCPD notes that he's been recently operating that way, leaving the armed robberies and hijackings to Packy. Even so, Packy and Gerald's latest arrests were both in 2005, and from what we can tell, for completely unrelated charges. By the time we reach the main story, the whole operation has completely gone underground. And Nico's introduction in 3-Leaf Clover, setting them all up to rob the Bank of Liberty, shows us just how protective Gerald is over the people he brings in.
Jerry's the man. And you remember Michael, St. Michael?
Yes, it's nice to meet you.
Nico's a trip, man. I met him through that Puerto Rican coke dealer.
So you want to involve him in family business? What do you know about him?
What I know is he likes a fight and he ain't the fucking law.
Oh. No offense, mister. That ain't good enough.
Well, it's good enough for me.
He's a good lad, Jerry. Was I talking to you, inbred halfwit?
Derrick's own return to Liberty City happens to coincide with Gerald's eventual arrest, putting Francis in a much more vulnerable position than he lets on. When Francis learns his brother's back in town, he knows Derrick, the informant, is willing to do anything. And it's not so much that he has an immense amount of dirt, it's the fact that he's willing to say anything at all that makes him the biggest threat. He even says himself, the criminal brothers he can spin. But Derrick is a different problem entirely. And think about it, Francis already had Nico take care of Tom Goldberg and all the blackmail evidence he held. He also dealt with Clarence Little, who'd recently been talking to the LCPD about police corruption, information that almost certainly would have traced back to Francis himself. Even Clarence had a suspicion that Francis would try something, as when Nico showed up, he even dropped Francis by name. But now, with Francis's own brother chatting up journalists at the worst possible time, while Francis is actively gunning for police commissioner, being seen with Derrick, a known snitch, means the opportunity for him to effectively do something or have some preventive measure enacted is long gone. Choosing to sit down and meet with him publicly could have been a giant risk, a major form of political suicide. Because another element of all this is when you dive into all the police records with all the McRearys, each one of the records make mention of each McReary. Marines even says that she's the mother of Derrick, Gerald, and Packy. Packy mentions being the underling of Gerald, and Gerald handing off work to Packy. Derrick's, on the other hand, doesn't mention anyone else. But the point here being, even on Marines, all 3 boys are mentioned. Francis isn't mentioned whatsoever. To be fair, neither is Kate, and from a criminal standpoint, it does make sense to keep tabs on associates that are actively working together or tied to the same organization, but Kate doesn't go to the extreme lengths of disowning her connection to her brothers or even actively trying to hide it. And considering Francis is in the position of deputy police commissioner, naturally it does make you wonder if he had the ability, or even outright did illegally, alter some of these records, going even further to protect the fact that he was related to them. But here's what stands out most: Francis's own reasoning for wanting Derrick dead. Sure, there's that cold, career-focused drive we've come to expect from Francis, but he goes a little further, calling Derrick sick, saying he's always been sick. Francis paints a picture of Derrick as this reckless guy, always jumping into other people's fights. He's talking about Derrick's early arrests tied to protesting, and even his decision to leave for Ireland. Francis calls it all foolish, betraying people, then running off to hide. Then he lands on the real kicker. Derrick only left Liberty City in the first place because he got caught stealing from the Mafia.
He's sick. He always was. He's always off getting involved in someone else's fight, making a fool of himself, betraying people, going into hiding. He's an idiot and a coward.
It's not my business.
Whatever he stood for, he betrayed. He only left here in the first place because he was caught stealing from the Mafia. He's a pathetic wretch.
That last claim, it's the most intriguing part. Because according to Packy, before Derrick left, Francis actually threw him a big going-away party back in the late 80s, right after Derrick hit a rough patch of depression. And as we know how Derrick handles depression, he turned straight to heroin to numb it all out. So was that party Francis's own twist of pushing Derrick to get clean, or to just start somewhere else and give him one less problem to worry about? Maybe it's the mixture of the two, but it also muddies Derrick's timeline. Because if we look at Bucky and Aiden's police reports, their arrests are tied to Derrick, or at least more so Aiden's last arrest, where the three of them were pulling off a string of robberies. Robberies that, as Francis points out, were apparently tied to the Mafia. So now, Francis gives us this element of the timeline of his brother having this clear pattern of stirring up trouble, dragging others down, and then snitching to save his own skin. Or, in the last case, snitching and then disappearing. Now that he's back, the only difference is that the person who'd get taken down this time is Francis's career. The one thing he's always twisted his logic around to justify. He frames his corruption as a necessary evil for the community's good, covering his selfish moves as something noble. We've seen it with Clarence Little and his second in command. The big question with Derrick, though, is how much of Francis's story holds up this time. And with everything we learn about Derrick's actions as being a snitch and potentially even snitching on his brother Gerald, does it actually make Nico's choice easier or harder, picking who lives and who dies between the two of them?
Strange seeing you here, Officer McCreary.
I told you to come here, fucking maggot. I know enough, boy.
Oh, what do you know, boy?
I know you killed Mikhail Faustin. I know a group of Russians want you dead. I know you ain't no saint, boy.
Our first real mission for Francis sets the tone for everything we see from him later. Right away, he shows he knows exactly who he can use, leveraging his eyes, ears, and position inside the police to his advantage. And he does it with this extremely disrespectful confidence, like he expects anyone he deals with to just fall in line and do what he says. Throughout Grand Theft Auto 4, as Nico works with all sorts of people, we see how he handles liars, hypocrites, or anyone who can't own up to what they really are. Nico doesn't just get disrespectful, he lays it out all plain and simple. And with our first mission with Francis, it reveals a little bit of naivety on Nico's part. Confused as to why he would run into Francis here at the docks, to then discover, in a pretty disrespectful way, that Francis was the one that actually contacted him, and that it's in his best interest to track down Francis's blackmailer, because otherwise, he has enough evidence to arrest him. Francis already knows practically everything Nico's been up to up until that point in Liberty City, killing Mikhail Faustin, stirring up trouble with the Russians, and eventually getting tangled up with Elizabeta Torres, which means working with Packy. If we break down Francis's missions, excluding Blood Brothers, where he asks Nico to kill Derrick, his missions split neatly into two categories. The first two revolve around blackmail. In both, Francis pleads his case, basically saying men have to do what men have to do. Life is messy. He asks if a guy makes one mistake, should that ruin his whole life? He's a good man. He says Goldberg just has it all wrong. But when staying on his record, it's over for him. Francis claimed Goldberg's dirt on him was headed straight to the DA, enough to launch Goldberg into Congress. Problem is, the game never spells out exactly what Francis did that's so damning, or helpful to Goldberg's apparent career pursuits. I've heard theories, everything from outright corruption to financial kickbacks, judging by how much cash he throws at Nico. Or maybe since he later targets Clarence Little, a pimp and drug dealer, Goldberg caught Francis with prostitutes or something personal like that. But it's all speculation. Given the family baggage Francis has, he might have just been hypersensitive to anything that smells like scandal, or forces him to just defend himself publicly, resulting in an utter collapse of potentially everything he built up until that point. Then come the final two missions, killing Clarence Little and later his second in command. That's where the real philosophy of Francis shines through, and we get the clearest glimpse of what he is probably tangled up in.
So listen, I got something I need you to do.
This is the last time.
Of course. Some drug dealer is holed up in a tower block in East Holland. Now, this scumbag's been pushing drugs, pimping women, you name it, he's done it. I need him dealt with.
Isn't that police work?
Sure. And the moon is made of cheese and the streets is paved with gold. Wake up!
Excuse me?
The guy's guilty as sin. He is sin! But it'll take me a year to get the evidence. More, maybe. And maybe good men will get taken down by that evidence. Maybe people make mistakes. But this guy is scum.
What Francis is really doing here is using philosophy to excuse outright murders and the disappearance of people who have evidence on him. Evidence that could put him away for good. At first he frames it as a matter of necessity. The system's too slow, too flawed, too bureaucratic to handle Clarence properly. It would take him over a year to properly put him away. And in the meantime, he argues good people could end up getting dragged down by that same evidence. That's the story Francis tells himself when he first asks for Clarence to be killed. Then when holes start getting poked through the explanation, he falls back on the same old line. People make mistakes. He makes mistakes. But Clarence is scum. Just look at his criminal record. That, in Francis's mind, is proof enough. In the follow-up mission, when Nico is sent to kill the man who takes over Clarence's operation and went into hiding, and is now beginning to talk with the authorities, we see Francis's philosophy evolve even further. He insults Nico for not doing the job properly from what he claims, and even threatens to have him arrested, only for Nico to then knock him back down to reality.
I paid you to do a man's job, you amateur, you fucking boy!
No. You sent me to kill one guy who would put you in prison.
Bullshit! Alright, I'll tell you what, genius. I'll tell you fucking what. Tell it to the judge. Tell him I only sent you to kill one guy, so it ain't your fault. I wonder what he'll say. Maybe he'll let you walk, on account of you being brain dead and totally fucking mentally retarded.
Maybe he will. Either way, you're screwed.
Whoa. Wait. Look.
This is where the reasoning of Francis hits its peak. There's no good or evil, just shades of gray. He's doing what's necessary for the good of the community, and if everybody just does their 1%, as he says, and as Nico does on his behalf, then the city would be a much better place. Of course, it's all just a fabricated excuse, a way to dress up his own actions in some kind of moral clothing. He leans on their crimes as justification, the same way he does with Derrick, Clarence, and Clarence's lieutenant, who he claims was selling heroin to kids. But outside of their rap sheets, Nico never buys into this helping the community story. Even in his final conversation with Francis, he cuts straight through it, tells him to stop lying and just admit these moves do nothing but benefit just him. And he's right. Little was already in the police database. The LCPD knew exactly what he was up to. This wasn't Francis playing neighborhood watchman, keeping tabs on the worst drug corners, gang activity, or prostitution rings, or trying to clean up the streets legally and morally in his own pursuit of reaching police commissioner, but rather having a short-sighted vision on how to get to the next step, and then when someone ultimately discovered what he was doing, panicking and doing whatever he could in his own power to silence those people and secure the one thing he valued most, his career and his image. And keep in mind the hot water the LCPD was already in at the time, something you can only really catch if you dig into the in-game online news articles. Francis might have actually made a fitting police commissioner for an organization already under severe public scrutiny. Reports of civilian killings and police brutality were popping off all over the city. Had Clarence, Goldberg, or anyone else with real dirt on police corruption actually come forward, it would have been explosive. We're talking a full-scale scandal that could have restructured huge chunks of the entire police force citywide. And for those wondering just how massive the LCPD is, the game mentions 40,000 sworn officers, Noose included. And as we see in the Ballad of Gay Tony DLC, there was even a rogue Noose division on the payroll of Markiashvili, protecting him and planning evidence to frame Ray Bolgren for his arrest. I genuinely believe that if it wasn't for Nico's personal distaste for liars, hypocrites, and people who do the exact same shady things he does, while preaching from a moral high ground like Francis constantly does, Francis's perception might have been a lot better. And honestly, if Francis had just been more open, even behind closed doors, about his family, admitting privately with Nico that he was trying to do better but still falling into the same patterns as his brothers, I think people might have cut him some genuine slack. He's not even the only corrupt official in Grand Theft Auto 4. Nico works with the IAA and the mob through their introduction, and in the Lost and Damned DLC we meet Thomas Stubbs, a congressman representing Liberty City, who straight up hires Johnny to kill his own uncle, all in the name of securing an inheritance and boosting his public image off of a family tragedy. But it does raise the big question, given everything we know, who dies canonically between Derrick and Francis, and why? Personally, I don't think what makes sense canonically is the same as what feels right. Canon-wise, I'd say it's Francis who gets killed. Nico clearly can't stand his arrogance and hypocrisy. And as sad as it is, when Francis is killed, it doesn't seem to be as big of a tragedy to the family as when Derrick is. The only one that seems to properly mourn the death of Francis is Maureen, and Katie, who feels worse for her mom than anything else, but also acknowledges that all her brothers basically walk a particular path. Plus, the way Nico enters the church at the wake speaks volumes all on its own. With Francis killed, Nico walks straight up to Derrick and sits right beside him. But with Derrick gone, it's completely different. There's just a subtle pause where Nico acknowledges Francis with a glance and then chooses to move on and sit alone. It shows exactly how Nico feels about the man who ordered his brother's death, cold, distant, right up into the final moments. But in terms of what feels right between killing these two, I'd say probably Derrick. It's easy to feel sorry for him, and I think even Nico does genuinely. There's glimpses in the park that Nico flashes to Derrick that makes it seem like he genuinely does feel sorry for him. But once you learn what a massive snitch Derrick is, and how he might have even gotten his younger brother a long prison sentence, that's tough to get behind. Either way, you've got two brothers, a corrupt cop or a junkie informant, both asking Nico to pull the trigger on the other. And I guess that's the real tragedy of the McRearys in a nutshell.